Before the U-2 program ever got off the ground, the CIA sat down and put a price on a pilot's life, then hid the answer inside a silver dollar. This is Redacted Skies, the declassified stories the Cold War left buried. Most people who know this story think they already know the disturbing part. Pilot gets shot down, had a suicide device, chose not to use it, came home in disgrace. That's the clean version. It's also missing almost everything that makes this one of the strangest decisions of the entire Cold War. Because that device wasn't standard issue, only one was ever built. The man who built it was the most dangerous chemist the U.S. government ever employed. And the pilot who ended up wearing it around his neck, floating alone through Soviet airspace, with the ground coming up fast, had turned it down every single time he'd been offered it before. Until that flight. What he did with it next is almost nothing like what you've probably heard. That pilot was Francis Gary Powers, a CIA employee flying secret reconnaissance missions over the Soviet Union in a plane so secret almost nobody knew it existed. Since its first flight in 1956, the U-2 had become America's best set of eyes behind the Iron Curtain. It could sit above 70,000 feet higher than anything else in the sky and photograph Soviet military sites from the edge of space. Powers was the most experienced pilot in the program. He'd flown the mission dozens of times. It had become routine. President Eisenhower personally signed off on every single overflight. His CIA director, Allen Dulles, kept assuring him the plane was untouchable. Even so, Eisenhower hesitated on the flight scheduled for May 1st, 1960. He was due to meet Khrushchev at a summit in Berlin in 2 weeks and didn't want to blow it up before it happened. He approved the flight anyway. That single decision, fly it, protect the intel, hope nothing goes wrong, is the quiet thing that set everything else in motion. Powers' flight had already been scrubbed 3 times for bad weather, and the delay meant his usual aircraft was grounded for maintenance. He ended up flying a different U-2 one with a track record of mechanical problems, and it left him uneasy enough that when he was offered a poison pen hidden inside a silver dollar, he said yes for the first time. Every previous mission, he'd turned it down. Stop there for a second, because that's not a small detail. A man who'd flown this exact mission dozens of times and always declined the kill device changed his mind on the one day everything else was already going wrong. And what he was carrying that day was nothing like the cyanide pill people picture. CIA chemist Sidney Gottlieb had gone far beyond anything as ordinary as cyanide. The toxin loaded onto that pen was saxitoxin, a naturally occurring poison, so potent that according to toxicology researchers, it outranks strychnine and curare for lethality. One of the leading Soviet toxicologists who later examined it reportedly couldn't identify what it even was. The delivery mechanism was almost theatrical. Unscrew what looked like an ordinary sewing pen, and underneath was a sheathed needle with a groove of sticky brown paste, enough to kill within seconds of breaking skin. Here's the part that wrecks the standard gear assumption most people carry into this story. Gottlieb and his team at Fort Detrick built exactly one of these. A single hollowed silver dollar. One poison pen. Nobody wanted more of them in circulation, because if a pilot actually used one, it would be a public relations disaster for the entire program. This wasn't something every U-2 pilot clipped to their flight suit. It was a one-off prototype, and on May 1st, 1960, Powers happened to be the one wearing it. So who was Sidney Gottlieb? Because this is where the story turns genuinely strange. Gottlieb ran the CIA's mind control and assassination research through the 1950s and 60s, the program known as MK Ultra. He oversaw interrogation experiments at black sites on multiple continents and built poisons designed to kill without leaving a trace, including some intended for Fidel Castro. Congressional investigators later tied him to schemes involving poisoned cigars, a scuba suit dusted with botulism toxin, booby-trapped seashells, and a thallium-based depilatory meant to make a target's hair fall out. That's the man who personally handed Powers the silver dollar as a going-away gift. So on the morning of May 1st, 1960, you've got the CIA's most prolific poison scientist handing his one-of-a-kind shellfish toxin device to the agency's single most experienced pilot, right before a flight the president had almost scrubbed. And then Powers is in the air alone, 13 miles up, crossing the entire Soviet Union. A Soviet SA-2 missile detonated near the plane as it cruised over the Ural Mountains, tearing off both wings. Powers reached for the plane's self-destruct switches twice, but ran out of time, and had to kick free of his oxygen line before it tore loose and released him from the spinning cockpit. Then, silence. His parachute opened. He was hanging in the air above Russia, with nothing to do but think. This is the part almost every retelling rushes straight past. As he drifted down toward the Russian countryside, Powers pictured the kind of interrogation waiting for him below and weighed whether to use the poison pin hanging around his neck. According to his son, he didn't just consider it and move on. He actually took the pin out of the coin while still in the air, held it, and thought seriously about using it right there. Then he made a call. Not yet, but keep it close. He tucked it into a flight suit pocket in case he needed it once he was on the ground, tore up his maps, and realizing the coin itself would be the first thing confiscated, threw the silver dollar away into the field below. That's a very different picture than he had a pill and chose not to use it. He was actively managing his own options in real time. Mid-fall, alone over hostile territory, he landed hard, was captured almost immediately, and was taken to Lubyanka prison in Moscow. Here's the part that almost never makes it into any retelling of this story, and it might be the strangest beat in the whole thing. Powers still had the poison pin on him through several strip searches. During the third one, according to his son, he voluntarily told the KGB agents exactly what the object was not to bargain, but so they wouldn't accidentally poison themselves handling it. A condemned man sitting in a Soviet interrogation cell, warning his captors about a lethal toxin so they wouldn't get hurt by it. It's the kind of detail that doesn't fit the usual Cold War spy story shape, so it usually gets cut. You'll often hear this story framed as, Powers was ordered to kill himself if captured. That framing is exactly what caused the firestorm when he came home, but it isn't what the record shows. CIA Director William Colby said plainly, years later, that Powers was not instructed to use the device it was offered to him as an option, not a command. The CIA handed a man a one-of-a-kind death device and essentially said, "This is yours if you want it." When he didn't use it, a large part of the public treated that as a betrayal. Some Americans argued he talked too freely to the KGB. Others said outright he should have killed himself rather than be captured. The New York Herald Tribune put the question to its readers directly. Why hadn't Powers used the poison needle he had on hand? The country wanted a martyr. Powers had chosen to stay alive. For a while, America didn't forgive him for it. For weeks, Powers was questioned up to 11 hours a day, 7 days a week. His son later said there was no physical torture, but there were bright interrogation lights, sleep deprivation, and repeated threats of death. He stood trial for espionage on his 31st birthday, no less with a defense lawyer who barely spoke English, and was sentenced to 10 years. On February 10th, 1962, 1 year, 9 months, and 10 days after he was shot down, Powers was traded for Soviet spy Rudolf Abel at the Glienicke Bridge in Berlin, the crossing that later gave Bridge of Spies its name. He came home expecting relief. What he got was closer to a second trial. A congressional hearing in March 1962 formally cleared him, and a CIA review concluded the agency was quite satisfied with how he'd conducted himself in 1965. He was awarded the Intelligence Star, the agency's highest honor for bravery. But by then, the damage to his public reputation had already been done, and it never fully went away. And then his personal life came apart just as publicly as his capture had. In August 1962, 6 months after coming home, Powers filed for divorce from his wife, Barbara, stating she'd overdosed on sleeping pills and spent 3 days hospitalized. In court, he testified that during his imprisonment, he'd sometimes gone 45 days without a letter from her, and that the only person who'd ever truly mistreated him counting his time in a Soviet prison was his own wife. Barbara countered that she'd suffered just as much as he had, and that he'd come home void of all feeling except bitterness toward her. A man who survived a missile strike, a KGB interrogation, and nearly 2 years in a Russian prison came home and said the worst treatment he received was from his own wife. Believe him or not, that's the kind of gut punch detail most versions of this story skip in favor of ending cleanly at the bridge. If you're finding this as strange as I am, drop a comment with the detail that surprised you most, and if you're new here, this is the kind of history we dig into. Subscribe and stick around. Powers spent 1962 to 1970 working as a Lockheed test pilot, with the CIA quietly covering his salary. Then he wrote a memoir about the whole ordeal, and Lockheed let him go. The book had caused friction with the agency. He went from there to reporting traffic for an LA radio station, then to flying a news helicopter for NBC. On August 1st, 1977, Powers and his cameraman were heading back to Burbank after covering a brush fire near Santa Barbara when the helicopter ran out of fuel and went down near the Sepulveda Dam. Both men were killed instantly. The man who'd once flown America's most secret aircraft at 70,000 feet over the Soviet Union died covering rush hour traffic in Los Angeles. There's no tidy lesson in that. It's just what happened. Here's what I keep coming back to. The premise this whole video opened with, that Powers was ordered to kill himself, is a myth. He was given a choice, and every decision, from that parachute descent onward, was his, and his alone. Keep the pen, hide it, warn the KGB about it, stay alive, come home, and spend the rest of his life explaining that choice to a country that wasn't always sure it agreed with him. That silver dollar, the one Gottlieb built, the one Powers threw into a Soviet field mid-fall, is the only confirmed case of the CIA's entire shellfish toxin suicide program ever being deployed in the field. One device, one pilot, one flight, and he threw it away and lived to tell the story. You won't look at this era the same way again.